with some of the work we do, and I think that I'm kind of annoyed that I didn't have time to engage a bit more or come earlier today or yesterday and learn a bit more about the project. But Mikel and Irmak asked me to talk about basically my working experience at the New Economics Foundation, and I have extended this to my working experience in a quite different organization, which is the one I was working at before, which is the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, which they are two very different organizations, but I think they have interesting lessons and sides to them. So I'll talk for about 30 minutes, and then you can ask as many questions as you want, because I mean, when you talk about how it is working in these organizations, there are multiple angles, and I don't know which ones you might be more interested in, whether they are the internal logistics, or the internal politics, or the strategic thinking behind them, or what it is that you're more interested in. So I'll just let you go through that. But before I go into that, I think it would be useful to tell you a bit more about myself and how I got into that. So I am a biologist by training. I studied biology. I loved animals since I was a little kid, and I wanted to work with dolphins and whales. And then you go into the university and you realize that there's only going to be 0.1% of the students that will be able to work with dolphins and whales and be the Jacques Cousteau and so on. And then after working as a biologist, I was very interested in economics, because I could see that the planet has all the ecological relationships, but there is one driver, which is what mobilizes governments, which is the economy. And I kept thinking, I need to learn more about economics. So I started studying economics in Barcelona, and I became really disappointed about how economics was being taught. And I remember having a bit of a debate with a teacher who was saying, oh, you can grow infinitely. And I said, but surely you cannot. No, yes, you can. No, surely you can. And at the end he said, you're talking about the natural resources. Okay, yeah, maybe. So I quit the studies in economics in Barcelona, and then did some work on biodiversity research projects, European Union biodiversity research projects, did a bit of work at the Aquarium of Barcelona. And then I also got a job at WWF, Mediterranean Program Office, which has an office in Barcelona, and it's about training environmental organizations and capacity building of Mediterranean environmental organizations. That was very exciting to have an opportunity to work across the Mediterranean. But after 3 years there, I said, okay, this is a very nice job, but I still want to understand more about this link between economics and the environment. And I decided to quit my job and go to study a master's in that would already do that link in between environment and economics. And obviously then I was faced with the ecological economics route or the environmental economic route. And Joan might not remember this, but I came to meet him by surprise. I entered into his office and said, Joan, I want to study this. What would you suggest? And you named a few universities. But in the end, I went for the enemy. I went for the environmental economics course of UCL by David Pearce, and that was very interesting to learn the conventional economics approach and the environmental economics side. Although the work we do, it's much more aligned with the ecological economics approach and so on. But that was very useful to understand those tensions. And after that, then I got into the RSPB, and from there into the New Economics Foundation. So I've been living in the UK, in spite of my very Spanish Catalan accent, I've been living in the UK for 12 years now. And I'm going to tell you a bit more about how it is working first at the RSPB and then at NEF. So the RSPB is a huge organization, is massive, it's an institution. It was founded in 1889. It's older than Football Club Barcelona. Imagine. It has more than 1 million members only in the UK. That means that one out of every 60 persons in the UK is member of this organization. It has a budget of about £80 million a year. It has about 2,000 staff, including the reserve staff, more than 200 nature reserves, and about 15,000 volunteers. So it's like a multinational of nature conservation. And that's very exciting to be the first place where I landed in my new job as economist. When after finishing the masters, I started working at the RSPB in 2004. So I worked with the economics team for 3 years there. So the RSPB works at many different levels. It does lots of research, and they publish more journal articles a year than most environmental or conservation departments of several universities together. So there's lots of people doing their research, which is published and in the top journals. They do resource management. They purchase land and then manage it and improve and restore. They do lots of work on public engagement. For example, this coming weekend is the Big Garden Bird Watch, which means that about 500,000 people in the UK will be contributing to a national survey of how many garden birds they see in 1 hour. You need to take 1 hour over the weekend, and then you fill a survey online, and that gives them data to compare frequency and population density. It does quite a lot of work on policy and advocacy. So if you count the number of people working on policy, it's about 70 or 80 people. So in itself, it's probably the largest environmental policy unit organization that you might find across Europe, I would imagine. And they work at multiple levels. They also do campaigns, and when they mobilize their members, which they hardly ever do because they are very cautious, but when they mobilize their members, people listen to them, because 1 million members is more than all the members of all the political parties together in the UK. Very important to say that it's not just about birds, it's about nature, and birds are a very good indicator of nature, and therefore they work at all levels, and they work on water, they work on agriculture, they work on trade, they work on timber. They work mostly in the UK, like 80% of the work is in the UK, but 20% is international. They are also the founders, or one of the main, or more than half of the specific weight of BirdLife International, which is the network of organizations working for bird conservation. How it gets funded, where do these 80 million come from? So it comes mainly from members, because if you have 1 million member and each one of them pays between 40 or 50 pounds a year, that already gives you 50 million pounds. Legacies, lots of legacies, maybe 10 or 15 million pounds a year come from legacies, people that leave in their will money or properties or shares to the foundation, and because they have the sector of the members tend to be quite white, old men, quite conservative, more than progressive. They get quite a lot of legacies, but that means that every year they lose 100,000 members because part of them die. No? So every year they need to recruit 100,000 new members to stand still, which is 100. Imagine if you recruit 100,000 members in 1 year, no? Like that already puts you like in the largest NGOs of Spain, probably. They get grants and projects. They also get some funding from merchandising, like these very beautiful little birds. They also get some funding from the reserves. They also get subsidies from the rural development funds of Europe to manage some of the reserves and things like that. How is it working there? Well, it's fantastic as a staff, because you get lots of training. They really invest in staff, and I had the chance to do lots of courses like writing for results, or time management, or staff management, or reserves management. You can do all sorts of training, and every year you can do like 2 or 3 different trainings, which are very good. It's very hierarchical, because if you have an organization with more than 2,000 people, you need to organize it. Therefore, you need to have very clear line management, and you cannot let the staff to go around with their own ideas. It's quite slow and cautious, like they don't take risks. They are very, very aware of their reputation, and they don't ever want to upset their membership base, and that is a bit frustrating, but it's kind of like the reason probably why they are still there and going and powerful after more than 120 years. It's a beautiful place. There is a nature reserve around it. It's 50 miles away from London, 80 kilometers north, and it's very safe. Not in terms of criminality levels. It's very safe because you don't have to worry about where the money comes from. I mean, if you get a job there, you are very likely to be able to retire there. It's a bit like working in the civil service to a certain extent. And most of the people that I was working with had been there for 20 or 30 years. And they have long-term serving people, which are very passionate, and that's good in some ways, and it's also bad in many other ways. So I was there for three years, and I was part of a quick turnover. I was in the economics team, and these are some of the things we did. We were trying to generate economic arguments in favor of nature conservation, and showing how much employment nature reserves create. And for example, I was involved in one study that shows that the presence of the sea eagle in the Isle of Mull, which is in Scotland, attracts more than £3 million a year in terms of revenues to that economy. And it was about telling the story that having a nature reserve is not a waste of money or a waste of land. Actually, it can be very powerful for local economies and rural economies. And we also did quite close follow-up on economics informing policy processes. I was involved in the Water Framework Directive, looking at the nitty-gritty economic analysis that the government is going to use to design the program of measures to improve the water quality in Europe. And that's quite a luxury to be able to look at those things with that level of detail, and then be able to engage at that level. Then, after 3 years there, and having there I met who is now my wife. So it was kind of like, okay, I'm married, I had a kid, I was living in a house in London with a little garden, and I said, okay, I'm married, I have a kid, I have a house, I have a little garden, and I have a permanent job. So how did I got here? What comes next? Can life got any more exciting? So I decided to take a jump into the void and join the New Economics Foundation, which was a very different game, because there I was given like 1 year funding to develop the environment program. And if you don't develop it and get more funding, you're out of the game. And that's a very different context from the one I was at before. Huh? And I'll tell you a bit more about what happened then. But let me tell you a bit about the New Economics Foundation. So it started in 1986 as an alternative summit to the G7 meetings that were taking in place. And then it became like the secretariat of TOES, the other economic summit. It was maybe at the time 3 or 4 staff, and now it employs between 50 or 60 staff, 2.5–3 million budget, depending on how good the year has been. Very multidisciplinary. We have staff, ecologists, economists, statisticians, social science. And we have the very humble objective of changing the economics of the world. And that's what we do. I mean, that's our mission. Our mission is to work towards an economy which delivers well-being, social justice, and ecological limits. And when you go around the places and say that, people think, are you nuts? What are you trying to do? I feel very comfortable today talking to you, but it's not always the case. We take out we produce some work that it's often quite provocative, that pushes the boundaries, and therefore it challenges the status quo. And for example, we come out saying you need to measure happiness. We did that 15 years ago. I mean, 15 years ago you say you need to measure happiness rather than GDP, and people laugh at you. But now things have moved on into that space. We recently, 5 years ago, said you need to work less, not more, in order to get out of the crisis. Another of these radical statements that people will say, what are you saying? So it challenges the status quo. And our starting point, and I'm sure you know all this, is that the current economic system is one that we can define as the system of the 4 U's. It's unsustainable. We're living beyond ecological limits. It's unfair. Difference between rich and poor is growing. It's unhappy, we are not translating use of natural resources into higher levels of life satisfaction, and it's unstable because if we don't grow, the system collapses, but if we keep growing the way we are doing, the system will collapse as well because of climate change impacts or other problems. So the current model is this one, is one that sees people and the planet as pure inputs to maximize returns on capital, and where we want to get to is a model that sees the planet as the ultimate input to deliver human well-being as the ultimate output. These are the things we should be caring about: the planet and what we're getting out of that, people's well-being, and the economy mediating and should be serving this purpose. Nothing new for you, but that's the story that we try to tell as much as possible. So changing the whole economic system is challenging and it's difficult, and we do that in many different ways, and we are very clear that we are not doing it ourselves. You need a broad support movement to do that. We're just like one more piece of the puzzle. We do lots of research. We do research with a purpose to try to influence policy. We are quite good at communicating things in a way that connect with the public, so that what happens often with the research is that it doesn't reach the wider public. So I think NEF has positioned in a quite good place in terms of translating the academic knowledge into public outputs. We are creating and strengthening a movement that tries to make that change. We do training, we do campaigning, we do networking with other organizations. How we get funded? It's mainly project funded. Even if it has the word foundation, we are not sitting on tops of money that then we can invest and get like an yearly unrestricted income. No, most of those £3 million come from projects, from winning projects, whether it's from the European Commission or private foundations or consultancies, which might be to the third sector or to the public sector or to the private sector as well. There is a board of trustees which overview the direction of the organization and approve the financial accounts, and then we have the management team. The management team, I am a program head, environment program head, so I am part of the management team with other program heads and the directors, and we meet every week to review things, whether it's finances or funding approaches or a strategy, and that's kind of like the unit, like the decision-making unit. We have you could split the people within the organization in three groups. The ones working on programs, which do a bit of research and policy and advocacy, the ones working on the movement building and campaigning, and the supporting teams, which is the communications and finance and so on. We have 5 programs, and I'll give you a quick overview of what they do, but the finance program does lots of work on reforming the finance sector, on banking reform, on trying to make people aware that how money is created and the opportunities that brings in terms of where you might want to allocate that newly created money to. Because at the moment we assume that any newly created money will automatically go into those segments of the economy that most need it. In practice, that's not true. So there are lots of opportunities to play with that. We have a well-being team that has done lots of social research on happiness levels, they designed the Happy Planet Index, I'll tell you a bit more about. Social policy, macroeconomics, environment, all this will come a bit more in the next section. Then the movement building, it's something quite exciting, and I think you might want to look at it on the website, because this was set up 3 years ago, and it's called NEON. It's the New Economy Organizers Network. And this exists to strengthen the movement working to replace neoliberalism with an economy based on social and environmental justice. So it's about, okay, if the economy isn't working, we need a new one. Let's get together and try to think how we make it happen. And at the moment has 627 members representing 428 organizations. It's NGOs, students' unions, workers' unions, faith groups. It diversifies a bit from the usual. There are lots of, I didn't include, students. I include like academics as well. but it diversifies a bit from the typical NGOs coalitions. And there is like a web forum, and people keep the debates going, and then out of that platform, new campaigns arise. Members find links, they collaborate on campaigns, put ideas together. They organize trainings on framing, how should you frame the messages of what you're trying to achieve. They had 3 very exciting trainings with, one was with the Dreamers movement in the US that got rights for the immigrants, and someone came to give a talk about how to create that movement. Naomi Klein as well was there in October and had a mini training with some of them. And they had one with George Lakoff about framing, how you have to present things. So it's quite an exciting initiative that helps many organizations think a bit differently about how they go about driving change, and it allows for those opportunities to arise. Some examples of the work we've done, okay. Ecodebt, some concepts that the New Economics Foundation coined. One is the Ecodebt Day. So this is taking the ecological footprint as a starter and saying, okay, how far in the year could we go as a global population using natural resources without putting at risk the provision of those resources in the future? So we work out that every year we are biting a bit more on the resources of the planet and making it difficult to, putting more pressures on the planet. Basically, it's just like a communication tool to show that we are consuming. So the planet needs 1.5 years to consume what we eat in a year. The Happy Planet Index, which you might have heard about, which looks at how efficient a nation is in generating long and happy lives per use of natural resources. And then you can make comparisons like that. So if you ask people which economy is more efficient, most of them would say the US. But if you compare it with another country, you can see that if you look at different things, Costa Rica would be much more than the US. Obviously, Costa Rica, it's an easy one to choose, no, for the comparison. But quite a lot of South American countries fare quite well in the Happy Planet Index. It's quite interesting how that comes out in the result. One piece of work we did that I thought it was quite interesting was the value of different professions. And we looked at the value of tax account, how much value professions bring to society compared to how much they are paid. No? So we looked at tax accountants, childcare workers, advertisement executives, marketing executives like David Cameron, recycling workers, bankers, and hospital cleaners. And we found, guess what? That childcare workers and hospital cleaners and waste recycling workers create positive value to society, whereas city bankers and tax accountants and advertising executives create negative value to society. And the difference between what they are paid is massive. So basically this was kind of provoking debate about whether we should be paying differently professions. And note here that, there is diversity within the sectors, and you cannot put everyone in the same pot, but it's a powerful way of communicating these things and creating debate. We did the same with fishing techniques. In my team, we have done quite a lot of work on fisheries, and this is 2 different ways of catching cod, bacalao, and you can troll or gillnet. This is carbon intensive, employs fewer people, and damages the environment, and that one is the opposite. And we saw that gillnets create positive value and trawlers create negative value. But then if you look at how much each one of these fleet is given in terms of quota, you see that trawlers get 99% of the allocation of quota, whereas gillnets are only given 1% of the caught quota, the amount of fish that can be caught that year. 99% is given to trawlers, 1% to gillnets. And in terms of subsidies, trawlers are getting 5 times more than gillnets. So even if the common fisheries policy that governs how you manage fisheries in Europe says this is a policy that needs to put the public interest first, it actually doesn't have any criteria to allocate funds and fish to maximize the public interest. Some examples of other work that our teams have done. This is from the finance team about calling for a more diverse banking system. We did a campaign about the Royal Bank of Scotland, which is owned by the taxpayers, because after the financial crisis this was rescued by the British government. So if it's owned by the taxpayers, why is it that it is the bank that has more links to tax havens than any other bank? Can we do something about it? Another campaign that we were thinking is like, can we make RBS divest from fossil fuels if it's owned by the taxpayers? Can we do something about it? NHS, big electoral battle now in the UK, health system, the national health system. The Conservative government has a very strong privatization drive and comes with the narrative that private is more efficient than public, and they have put this drive, so we came out with some alternative results to show that actually it's not that efficient, or you might be better investing the money in different ways, and that markets are not always the most efficient solution. Inequality, lots of work on inequality. It's a cross-cutting topic through the work we do. Why inequality matters to the economy, and it's also a hot topic. The Labour Party started the campaign with that, then it went a bit quiet. Hopefully now that the voting intention for the Labour Party is going down, maybe Ed Miliband will pick up back on this as a potential winning point, and probably will be genuine about doing, I think he's genuine about doing something about it, but the whole party makes it difficult probably. We did some work on overfishing, comparing which countries are contributing more for overfishing. This is only for deep sea species. Spain and Portugal are often worst case offenders in fisheries in Europe. We did one showing why restoring fish stocks makes economic sense. And then also we did a briefing comparing how accurate climate forecasts are versus economic forecasts. And basically making the point that we do policy based on extremely inaccurate economic forecasts, but we refuse to do policy based on climate change forecasts because they are not accurate enough. So he was kind of saying, well, actually, if you look at, and then we did three very different graphs to show those differences. NEF set up a consultancy branch 7 years ago. This was kind of a startup. And this was kind of saying, well, it's increasingly difficult to get funding for us. Let's create a branch that puts into practice our own ideas and tries to get some revenue, and then that revenue goes back to the organization. And this was a successful story in a way, because it started with one staff and we got some 0% loan, 0% interest rate loan from a foundation. That foundations are very happy to give you money if they see that there is a long-term financial sustainability plan there. So this was one way of saying, well, we're going to create this, it's going to bring some revenue, and then they lend us some money. And after 5 years, we managed to pay back all that loan. And since 2012, NEF Consulting has been generating some profit that then goes to NEF. And now is the largest contributor of unrestricted funds to the New Economics Foundation. It gives us about £200,000 a year, which is fantastic. Some issues in terms of, because they have a different board. So for example, they do some work for, they are a bit more free to engage with all sorts of clients, but obviously if they engage with certain type of clients, that could put at risk the reputation of NEF and what we do. So we try to keep an eye on that. And one extreme case was when someone came with the idea to do some consultancy work for Petrobras in Brazil. And then we said, no, absolutely. But you see, I'm just showing that as a danger of that the staff might have a similar idea about where you want to go to, but they might have different ways of going about it. And I'm just illustrating it as an example of risk that obviously was kind of like, no, I mean, conversation is finished. We are not doing anything with them. There is a whole lot of other clients that you could work with. So when I joined in 2007, I was told, okay, your task is to develop the environment program. And I was given like a bit of a blank sheet, and that was like very exciting, but also very challenging. And I started working on fisheries, not only because I'm very passionate about this subject, but I thought it was something that was a very strong case to be made for. It had not been told enough, and we started doing some work on it. It was the right time and the right place because the reform of the common fisheries policy was starting. Lots of foundations and donors started to put money into that. There was no one making economic arguments for sustainable fisheries, and we could fill that gap. And that was a successful story that then allowed us to get more funding, and hence we ended up having a big marine team, which NEF environment program was and is still called like the fish team. Is it what we need to be? No, we are much more than the fish team. But fish, a bit of big team of our own success, grew, and of the 5 staff, maybe 4.5 or 4, 80% are working on marine related issues. Energy and food are coming strong, and now we are actually putting lots of effort in developing those 2 areas so that they are at the same level as fisheries. Some very final reflections. We care lots about robust research, and that's very important, and we want to be right with what we say, what we do, but being right is not enough. If you think that having the evidence for something is going to drive change, that's not enough, and you see it constantly in the way government does policy. And that raises lots of issues about what strategy you follow to drive change. Playing the media game. We do quite a lot of playing the media game and challenging narrative. When you have to play the media game, you have to simplify results to a level that if you are the person that has done that research, you would be horrified. But it's that level of battle that it's at play. It's one narrative, which is the one that we hear every day, that it's the nature or it's the economy, or the renewable energy is going to mean that you're going to be cold, or this kind of narrative. You need to come back with some alternative narrative that challenges that. And then economics, incremental versus radical change. That's the other thing. I mean, you can make corrections to the current system, pricing some externalities, or you can go for a more fundamental change of the system. We are in the business of radical change, but to be honest, both the strategies, incremental and radical change, coexist now in the organization and coexist in the environmental movement. And there is lots of confusion about it, I think. That's why I said economics valuation as a double-edged sword. For example, the RSPB is really bought into valuing ecosystem services as something that is going to fix our problems. So is BirdLife, so is WWF. But Friends of the Earth and World Development Movement say, no, nature is not to be commodified, so don't value nature at all. And it's not a white and black thing. So it's quite a very, very difficult debate. So it's about, we are trying to play a role in trying to provide some clarity about that conversation, because it's not helpful to the movement if there is that division. And well, that's one of the tools that we use to explain people that by valuing things in economic terms, you're not going to be able to change things, because the value is most of it is incommensurable. And I leave you with all this website and emails and Twitters and newsletters in case you want to learn more. So I'll leave it there, and because you were a bit late, I have also been a bit late in my extension of the presentation, but I think we have a few minutes to talk.
Thanks a lot. I mean, I understand the challenges of setting up something this big and important, but I find it a bit shocking that the working conditions are so neoliberal when your main goal is, you know, economics as if people matter, you know? How do you feel about this? Such precarious, ultra flexible work environment?
Spot on. I mean, spot on. Very, very fair criticism, and kind of like, yes, I mean, why is that? And there is, that's something that we are talking about all the time within the organization, because we are saying, well, I mean, we talk about work-life balance, we talk about this thing. Most of the people there work very long hours because they are very passionate about the subject and so on. But, sorry, it shouldn't be like that. So, I mean, for me, the only solution to that is having a much more safe financial ground and financial stability that allows you to do that. And unless we don't make some significant changes to the business model that we have, it's gonna be very difficult to do that. I mean, one of the things I didn't raise is that we have huge overheads. So if I employ someone, and if this person has a £30,000 salary a year, I need to raise £65,000 to employ one person at £30,000 or £35,000 salary a year. If you're at the RSPB, you only need to raise £30,000 because all the other supports are covered. But I mean, it's a constant discussion about how we deliver better for the staff at NEF. I mean, there is a budget for training, but it's not being used because people don't have the time to put together good training proposals, and no one takes the initiative of making it happen. So the balance between the support and I think it's a bit of economies of scale as well. I mean, if we manage to grow to 80 people, maybe you could have a better relationship between staff that pays overheads versus supporting staff. I don't know. We are looking into it. Yeah.
Do you have any indicators about which kind of people you are able to reach with your awareness, rising awareness campaigns? Like what I mean, do you know if in the end are people that are already attuned to these ideas that will actually listen to you? Or do you problematize also this issue in order to arrive to as many people as possible?
Yeah, so it depends on some of the outputs. So we hit the media quite a lot, no? But you know that certain medias are read by certain type of people. So if you get something in The Guardian, you are kind of preaching to the converted. It's progressive left-wing thinking. Still, The Guardian is macro, 36 million viewers online, so probably you are opening the eyes of quite a lot of people. If you get something in the Daily Mail, you are absolutely touching on a sector of the public that hardly ever is exposed to these things. And then sometimes we have conferences that are preaching to the converted, which are more about networking, and other public events that actually bring a more diverse people. We try to track that, but we haven't gone as far as having some sort of neat pie chart showing the type of audiences that we reach.
Like also, how does this reflect into the language you use or the kind of images?
Yes, that's a critical point, because I mean, if we do a press release and we approach The Sun or the Daily Mail, they already know who we are, and it's very unlikely to get it there. But if we go to an association like, for example, the Women's Institute, which is an organization that often gets quoted by the Daily Telegraph, and we get a quote from them in the press release, then that is gonna make it much more palatable for them. So we think about some of those communication strategies. Yeah.
Two more questions and then afterwards.
Okay, thanks for the presentation. My question is a bit more, let's say, abstract. Would you say that your organization is more oriented on policy making and policy influencing, or research itself? Because following what Diego answered, question about the precarious working, you have to find funding. How easy is to do not original research per se, but deep research on specific subjects? Is it easy with these limited resources? So I'm saying that, so is this a challenge that you want to face, or you are more focused on policy and in a very specific context?
Yeah, if it's alright for you, we can pick two.
Yeah.
I think it's related. Did you set up, I know this is a difficult question, but did you set up a method to evaluate the impact you may have are having on policy making?
Okay, so on the first one, it's very difficult to do deep, fundamental, long-term research of like a project of 2 or 3 years of research, like you might be able to do in universities or PhDs. This is something very difficult to do within the New Economics Foundation. Most of the research is targeted towards a particular objective, whether it is to influence a particular policy or something like that, or to create a new debate, some projects have 1 year, so in 1 year you can do quite a significant amount of research. but no more than that, I would say. So if you're looking to do something in the organization that could then evolve into a PhD, it's very unlikely. However, we publish in some journals. It's not the main activity, but maybe every year there are like 5 or 10 articles accepted in journals. Yeah. On the precarious thing, I want to make clear one thing, that, for example, in my team, we are 5 people working there. It's myself and 5 members of staff. And they are doing the work, and they have their projects, and I am in charge of the fundraising and the dealing with the donors and writing reports for them and getting more funding, so that they are disconnected from that, so that they can concentrate on their work. And actually we have secured funding for 2 or 3 years now, so that not everyone at NEF is just kind of like, oh my God. That, just to put that into context. In terms of the impact on policy, I mean, if you are focused on influencing one particular policy, you have an idea of what's the change you want to see, and whether it is a particular change in text, or it is whether it's approved or not approved. So that gives us the impact. But for every single project that we put, which is to donors ask you, what's the change you want to see? How are you going to measure that change? What's the impact you want to see? So you need to set all that framework and have the systems in place to measure that, so that then afterwards you can tell the story.
Well, more or less 3 questions. Start with the last one, because it was a bit what kind of direct balance you can make of your impacts in changing policy or supporting the social struggles, etc. But you talked now about the donors. Who are the donors? For instance, you have a lot of things now about austerity and cuts in public services. Who ask these projects? Maybe this can clarify. The second one is, how do you organize internally within this model of entrepreneurial and MIBA? How do you have any kind of structures where you regularly discuss between each other, for NEF having some political coherence and some the same approach, the way you see problems or priorities to give in one moment? Not be so dependent, let's say, now we have money for this, so we are going to this, but maybe the context asks for other kind of intervention, not to deal with the current context. And the third, you are professionals. Do you consider yourselves within to be activists, being professionals, or are you activists outside your profession? Let's say you like a lot the fisheries sector. You consider what you are doing is a type of activist, being professional of it, or you try also to have activism in other ways?
Yeah. Okay, so
Do you want to answer, or we can do one?
I'll answer them quickly. So the more you detach yourself from the specific the impact measurement, so the more micro the project, the easier to measure the impact. The more vague and macro the issue, more difficult to measure impact. And yes, we struggle with those things. For example, we can see how many organizations that previously were not talking about inequality are now talking about inequality, or how many people that didn't pay attention to the financial system as one of the problems that drive inequality or environmental degradation now are starting to move into that space, or becoming aware that actually they need to approach things from that way. One of the things we do is to tell many NGOs that unless they don't start looking at inequality or financial system reform, they'll never be able to deliver the mission of their organization. So you could track how these organizations are moving into that space, participants into the movement building in the NEON. You have some indicators, but it's always difficult to know how much you have contributed to that. It's very difficult to get donors to fund systemic change, because they don't understand it, and they want to get, I want to fund 100 hectares of mangrove protection, or 100 grants for people to study systemic change. Who? Changing the economy. Who? What? What are you going to be able to show on your annual report? So what we have been doing quite a lot is having conversations with foundations to explain them why, unless they do systemic change, everything else they fund will have a limited impact. And we have been quite successful in getting a few European foundations like the Oak Foundation or the Willum Foundation. Oak Foundation, OAK. So they invited us. Yeah, you can see all those foundations in the websites because we are very transparent about who funds us as well. We have a very clear, unlike other think tanks in the UK, you can see everyone who gives us more than £5,000 is listed there. And they understand now that they need to play to systemic change. And there is a group of big foundations in Europe talking about it. Even the MAVA Foundation, which is from the Hoffman family that helped set up WWF, they are starting having these conversations. It's a sign of changing the mindset. In practice, I don't know how far they're going to go. And when they need to see where they're going to be investing their money and how this affects their annual income and things like that, there are going to be some trade-offs there that not everyone is ready to touch. Structures, yeah, we have monthly meetings with all the staff. We have the management team every week, and then we have some specific specific meetings to talk about particular topics. One is about, for example, working conditions or training or strategic work around inequality. So there are working groups across the organization that provide the opportunity for input from different members of staff to design strategy in that way, so that it's not kind of everyone aligned in different ways. And in terms of activism, many of the staff are activists out of their work. But I mean, it's not that we say, all members of staff, we're going to the demonstration today, go there. We don't do that, but many of us go to demonstrations or are involved in many other organizations or groups that set up websites in 24 hours to raise something. So it's quite aligned. Not everybody, but some.
For the last one, okay.
Okay, yeah, a few short questions. I was going to ask about the donors, which she did, but it's a follow-up question. This talk is about starting a research institute. So let's say I wanted to start a research institute. How would I approach these donors? Are these through kind of formal grant programs that that you go to their website and they say, we're giving this grant, make this application, or they kind of accept invitations? Or can you talk a bit more about the actual process? That's the first.
Mm-hmm.
The second question is about the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, how do you account for their success? I mean, as you say, they have 80 million members, 100,000 members a year. I assume also, I mean, a related question is, what is the kind of demographic composition of their members? You mentioned a lot of elderly people, I'm assuming a lot of wealthier people. So is there anything, my question I guess is, what have you learned or taken away from how they are able to rally so many people that could perhaps be translated and used for a more radical institute to also reach out to that sort of number of people? And the third question, if you have time, is that I'm interested in some examples about the types of consulting work that NEF would do. If you could just speak of one or two examples.
Okay.
Contracts.
So I'll respond them the other way around. So in terms of consultancies, now we are doing a small consultancy for Christian Aid and WWF and Save the Children, which maybe you can help us with, which is answering the question, does economic inequality lead to more environmental degradation? Or does more environmental degradation lead to more economic inequality? And they want to do some work on that, and they want to do that. I mean, so that's one example. We do lots of impact measurement related consultancies. So NEF Consulting does lots of impact measurement to measure the impact of a project, to measure the impact of a particular intervention in social, economic and environmental terms, to design impact evaluation frameworks. So the social return on investment is one of these type of analysis that NEF Consulting has been pioneering and have self-proclaimed center of excellence of social return on investment, and they do training on social return on investment. We also do some consultancies, for example, because someone doesn't like the economic analysis that someone has done and they want to make a critique of it, and then we say, okay, we're going to look at it objectively, and maybe you're not going to get a very powerful critique, or maybe you actually find a very powerful critique. So we always make that very clear to the client, that they should not expect something that supports their case. In terms of RSPB success replicable to other areas, it's a different game. So, I mean, we're talking about an organization which has 125 years and occupied a space and the momentum, and I think it's, to be honest, I think it's two different games in a way. I mean, they have a very broad support base, very loyal, but they hardly ever mobilize them, or they don't mobilize them enough, which is very frustrating. For example,
Well, why do so many people feel they need to be card-carrying members of that organization?
why? Yeah, there is something very peculiar. Yeah, no, in the UK.
£50 a year.
Yes. Well, in the UK, people are members of many organizations. No, but many people are members of the organization support. There is a long tradition of support to charities in the UK, and the National Trust has 3 million members, and all families are members of 3 or 4 or 5 charities. And actually, when the financial crisis came in, they thought that the RSPB membership would go down, and they did some research and found that their membership to charities was one of the last things that people wanted to cut, because it was part of their identity. So I think it's a cultural, historical tradition of being members of these charities, and that's why there are these very powerful institutions, which makes the whole issue much more democratic in a way, because there are these very powerful citizen-based organizations that can challenge things very openly. No? So I think that's what happens. I mean, if you're trying to apply that model to Spain, is a different story. It's a different story. I mean, I've thought about it many times. Why can't we have 1 million member organizations here? But in terms of the activism and mobilizing people, there is lots of energy around now, and there is all the new platforms of technology and web-based initiatives, and there are all these new ways of gathering people to get support quickly for something, and I think that's what NEON is doing. It's creating a way that stems this type of initiatives. And then you asked me about the funding path. How do you go about developing a team? So it's a bit of a long-term game. So you need to, in the first years, say the first 3 years, you need to get enough money to keep yourself in post, and then you need to get money to do some things that give you visibility and get you known to the donors or to others, and you need to do your job well, in time, and not overspending, and then in those 3 years you can gain the confidence and the trust of people. And if you have gained the confidence or the trust of 1 or 2 funders talk to other funders, and then you become kind of a safe organization to whom to give money to. And it's about, the first 3 years for me were very challenging, because I had to do new work, and it was about finding pieces of work that would be visible and call attention, and maybe get a bit of media coverage, and then do it well. But at the same time, I had to do lots of consultancies about things I didn't know much about, which I was pushing myself a bit to the limit, like doing some consultancy for DEFRA on waste and business models for a low carbon economy in the southwest of the UK, in Cornwall, where I had never been to, and doing things that I said, why am I doing this? Well, I'm doing this because actually it's paying part of my salary, or 30% of my salary, and it will allow me to then develop new projects, and then if I make some profits I can invest it into new projects, and And then in the end, now I'm in a position where we have a team of 5 people and with 2 or 3 years of funding secured, and I don't have to spend so much time into this. We don't do much more of those projects, and we have managed to move from one in which we were doing projects responding to the. So first you respond to you go to where the funding is and try to get some funding. And parallelly, you're trying to create your own strategy and your own projects and trying to get funding into those. So through time, you should be reducing the money that comes, that you're responding to the funding opportunities, and gradually moving to building your program and have grown a network of funders that are interested in funding. Very simplistic model.
Asterix and Obelix model, no?
Okay, Asterix and Obelix model. Good. I like that. I like Asterix and Obelix. Yeah.
Last question. No regrets then?
No regret. No. I mean, I've really enjoyed my time at the New Economics Foundation. It's very good, and it's, I mean, something which is very good NEF is that flexible working. So we are not about how long you are sitting in your desk. People, you measure people's success and performance by outputs. So people can work from home. People want to do a PhD and then they work 2 days a week, and then go down to 2 days a week rather than 5 days a week. This is possible. People want to do a master's and then they reduce their time or their hours. It has all this flexibility that many other organizations don't have. For example, the RSPB doesn't have the level of flexibility. And that, for me, has been fantastic with balancing family. I mean, you need to go to the school to see the theater play of your kid Thursday at 9 a.m. I don't need to call anyone to ask permission to do that and justify why. I just do it, and you're a bit of owner of your own destiny in a way, which is very, very, it's fantastic. I think the problem is that most people working on NEF then might have problems to adapt to working in other places. Yeah.
Thanks, Aniol, very much.
Thank you.